Zaire.
Yeah.
Zaire. Tariq Zaire.
That's
All right, keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah,
Oh
sure.
yeah, we're
Okay.
gonna do it. Yeah.
No
Yeah.
problem.
Oh yeah. All right.
Start.
Go ahead. Keep going.
So the question is, what would sentience 2.0 look like? How would we know if
Exactly.
we've evolved? So, I mean, I think because evolution is driven by natural and artificial selection,
Right.
that there's these outside agents, whether it's the environment or other people or animals,
Yep.
that limit certain characteristics of animals. And so if I have, for instance, only one leg and I'm born, with in the wild, I have a less likely chance to reproduce.
Right.
And so less people will be born with just one leg. We'll have two because it helps us. But one problem is in modern society, we've advanced so far beyond the natural environment that we were evolved in.
Right.
There's less of those environmental factors that kill. I mean, there's still some.
Certainly.
Right.
But what if that's not a feature, if not a bug, but a feature? All right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, welcome to a reasonably spontaneous conversation I'm having here with Tariq Zaire. And I want to make sure that we have a little bit of background
Sure,
here,
yeah.
okay? Because I want to continue this conversation on evolution and see where we're going. One of the reasons why I wanted to ask you on the show is because I relate very much to your story.
Thank you.
I was born in Mexico. Even though you were born in the United States, you went to Egypt when you were young, and you have an Egyptian father, an American mother. I had a Mexican father and an American mother. So we both had that experience.
Yeah.
So you are 20 years old. This is you were born in 98, right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. When did you go over to Egypt, and do you have any memories and the sense of what that entire land, this Fertile Crescent, the place where, very close to where humanity actually arose?
I moved there when I was a baby, and I only lived there for a few years. There's pictures of me that I like crawled in a snake hole by the pyramids, and I liked rice pudding there, and I still love rice pudding.
Yeah.
But I don't remember any particular memories because I had infantile amnesia.
Right.
At the time, my brothers remember some things. My mom said that she liked to drive me through the Egyptian and talk to me about her. She liked reading physics books and poetry books, and so she would just as a baby she just wanted someone to talk to, and I don't remember that. But
does your curiosity stem from your mother's deep curiosity? Do you connect with it through there?
I mean, I would hate to admit it because it's always frustrating to say that your parents did something because it doesn't feel like yours. But I mean, I think I would have to give her some credit of that because she always loved reading. She's always had books in the house. And so ever since I was little, at my brother's basketball games or wherever, I would just be reading a book. And I independently do it now because I just like to do it. It's a thing that brings me pleasure, but I'm sure there's some connection to her passion for that as well that inspired me in the first place to do
Did you start writing because you're a columnist at the University of Texas at the Longhorn paper? I also did that when I was at the University of Houston.
Yeah.
I was a columnist, and so did you get into writing early?
I did. I remember I would write just for fun. Like when I read a book, I would write sort of a summary of it. I remember, and I would hide them. I was embarrassed about them. I remember one time I was little, I read a biography of Isaac Newton, and I wrote, these poetic things of how great he was, and I hid it under my bed. But I always liked it because it's just a process of thinking. I think writing is equivalent to thinking, except you're forced to make conceptual sense when you do it. Because when you're thinking in your mind, you're allowed to skip between points and accept presuppositions that maybe shouldn't be accepted. But when you're writing and you see it on the page, you're forced to really think carefully about it. And it helps when you're talking to other people, such as now, when you've written about ideas because you know how to articulate it better. And you've thought through all of the different contingencies that you usually hit, those road bumps. And
did you always know that you had a very high processor, that you thought about things that your peers did not think about, that you began to expand in that? And I'm not talking about in a hierarchical scale because we can talk about about intelligence, and we can talk, but certainly about curiosity and about the depth of because astrophysics was something that you were like, where did it all, where did all this come from?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was initially started by my mom and those things, but I remember, like, when I was little, I loved homework. Like, I would take it with me at home. I would ask for more. In kindergarten, they moved me up a grade or whatever. But kindergarten, you don't really do it. You just color. So maybe I just colored well, but they
look at that. He colors so well within the line. Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, I always enjoyed those types of things. Whereas to my classmates, I don't think it's their fault. I think they might have, people have bad teachers, especially with regards to math and other subjects, where the teachers, I think you have to be almost a bad teacher to inspire students to hate those subjects like math and physics, because when you really confront them, they're the most interesting things, I think, that are possible in the world. Like, and so I have a thought experiment if you want to know.
I would love one, but I want to bring the audience in, that if you're listening to this, and especially if you're listening to it on speakers and you hear something in the background, in the main studio back over here at Austin Public Access, they're having some, is that heavy metal?
I think it's just rock.
Just rock. They're rocking out. So just, all right, we're having out. Now, now back to our thought experiment.
Yeah. So I thought of this when I was little, and this is how I always felt since I was little. I don't know the word to describe it, but I know a situation I can describe to make you feel how I feel.
Please.
Okay, so you can close your eyes if you want, and imagine that the chair you're sitting in now, slowly as we're talking, begins to vibrate and rumble, and you don't know what's happening, and it suddenly gets more and more intense as we go on, and I stop speaking, and I look at you, and I look to the camera and aghast, and you start slowly rising up into the air, and the chair that you're sitting in is forming into this cartoonish monster, and the mouth happens to form exactly where you're sitting, and you fall through it, right? And you don't get chewed, and I try to reach for you, but the mouth closes, and you're in darkness, and you're sliding down a slimy esophagus, and you see a tiny pinprick of light down at the bottom, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And as it gets bigger and bigger, eventually you slide right through it onto the sidewalk of a bustling city corner street. And there's skyscrapers, and there's these weird aliens in business suits and tuxedos and have their briefcases, and they're going to their respective jobs. And in that moment, right, do you think to yourself, well, I guess I got to go get a job, and you go and clean and buy a suit? Or do you say, what is going on? Where am I? What is this place? Who are these people? And I think that we're in the exact same situation right now, except instead of a monster's esophagus, it was your mom's birth canal, as awkward as that is. And because you had infantile amnesia, you didn't initially ask those questions, but there's no reason, there's no more information we were given to those answers that should make us complacent in finding them, because we don't know where we are, we don't know what these things are. And so the idea of just saying, well, what's the use of physics or math or any of these subjects that in school that ask these fundamental questions? Well, to me, it's like the only logical thing to do, because we're in that situation, is to ask those questions, because anyone in that situation would do exactly that. And so that's how I've always felt with regard to physics and also philosophy and everything like that, is that it's not just a niche thing that some people like and it's not really practical or anything.
Sure.
To me, it's the only rational thing to do given our present circumstance and condition that all of us are in.
Well, I agree that it's the only rational.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk, but rational and emotional as we're bringing ourselves along, because I know that I am growing. I have emotional intelligence.
Yes, right.
And I have my IQ and I have my EQ, and I also have what I'm studying through Cindy Wigglesworth and others is SQ, which is spiritual intelligence, which is purpose.
Absolutely.
How do we grow our purpose so that we know, why am I here?
Yeah.
What do you have a sense? I mean, you and I both have read Coelho's The Alchemist.
Oh yes. Yeah.
And that's where he's searching for. That's where Santiago is on the journey. He's searching for his personal legend.
Right.
Have you? Where are you on that journey?
I mean, usually people see. You mentioned the intelligence, emotional intelligence. They usually see the emotional intelligence and the purpose that you mentioned as in a friendship, and
Yeah.
the rational and the purpose as in conflict.
Right.
Whereas I think they're all friends to
They've
each other.
got
They
to
all melt.
be. They have got. There's got to be a Venn diagram
Yeah.
where.
Exactly. And so by exploring, rationally and emotionally, both your origins and your presuppositions in the form of both universal human nature and your own unique human nature that you're born with, by exploring that, I think that does give you a picture very much like The Alchemist, where everyone has their own personal legend that only they are capable of exceeding. Because your life is different from mine in 1,000 different ways, and so things that I will never possibly I don't even know what I don't know, and you have access to those, and every single person is unique in that way, where they have something to offer the world that only they as an individual can offer. And that couldn't be closer to, I think, what these spiritual stories point towards, that we all have our personal legends and destiny, and that it takes, a courage and perseverance to pursue them. But if you do, then it's a profound experience.
In every way.
Mm-hmm.
How do you overcome? I find myself, I'm wired optimistically.
Yeah.
That's just the way I'm wired.
Mm-hmm.
I wake up in the morning and I'm I'm bright. It's just the way. Not everyone does that.
Oh yeah.
Not everyone does.
Mm-hmm.
How are you wired? What are your baselines?
I think I'm the same way. I think of it the same way. People, depression is not people's choice. They can't really. It's not their fault that they feel that way, and it's usually biological to some degree, out of their control. I feel the same way. And I almost feel guilty about it, but I just feel happy.
Right.
And I don't. It's not because of anything I've done or that I've. Maybe it has some parts of it, but
sure.
I just feel that way, and I can't help it. But there are road bumps in the
Sure. So talk about overcoming something. I mean, because were you a nerdy kid? Did you have? I mean, you talked about having two older brothers, and having older brothers, that sit there and look like, what is this little guy doing here? And it's bad enough that there's two of us. What's this third guy doing here?
That's exactly how they were. They were jocks. They loved basketball. They taught me basketball. So I had the advantage. Thankfully, I think they taught me. If they weren't for them, I would have been completely, I wouldn't have built any muscles. I would have stayed in my room all day. But I was, I guess nerdy. I don't think that's a derogatory term anymore.
I don't think so at all. I mean, this is. But again, we're talking about both cultural stereotypes and who we are, and that is so just.
Right, and I mean, I was nerdy, and so is the question how did I overcome speed bumps related to that?
Talk about some of the speed bumps that bump that you're overcoming or being a part of, so that it relates to what others who don't have the blessing of optimism that we have, so that it's the same, because each of us has an opportunity to overcome.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think there's when you're confronted with the suffering of life that inevitably comes, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, I think everyone experienced that, no matter what you are. There's two, unconsciously I've done it. Now I sort of know what I'm doing because I've read the theories of how it works, but I've taken a two-pronged approach where Western philosophy and civilization, usually when presented with these sufferings, delves into the self, right? Of what can I do to, despite the environmental things that I can't control, to make my life as best as it possibly can.
Right.
And so that's, I think, a good message for people to have, that, just do whatever you possibly can that's in your control, and, you have to ignore what you can't do, and that's the best that you can do.
Right.
But sometimes there's environmental conditions that are too hard, that are too much on the weight side for you. Whatever you can do is never going to surpass that.
It's very. I look at some of the camps in Syria.
Yeah. Right.
I look at some of the refugee camps. I look at some of the people that come from up through Central America and who come with just and turn themselves in for. How can I? It's very difficult for me. I mean, I can understand on an intellectual level, but how do I empathize with that?
Empathize. Yeah, I mean, you can't tell a child who's been separated from his parent who's 5 years old, well, just do what you can and just forget about everything. Right, like
slip upper lip,
just
young
get
man.
through it. Yeah, right.
You're good.
It's not gonna work. It's gonna scar them more.
Sure.
Right, and so that's where I think the second avenue that I prioritize in my two-pronged approach, which is usually associated with Eastern practices and philosophy, right, where it goes the opposite direction. Instead of delving into the self and saying, what can I do? It goes and it simply says, observe the suffering, right, that it causes, right? What does it feel like?
Yes.
And often just feeling it and disconnecting it from all these jumbles of thoughts that you attach it makes it less worse. For instance, they've done studies with people who have chronic back pain,
right,
and they've given them mindfulness meditation over a few weeks, and it drastically reduces the pain because they found most of the pain, and they've corroborated this by scanning their brains,
right,
comes from the worry and anxiety that it's going to be like this forever, and I'm never going to feel, blood. but once you calm down and you just notice the physical sensation of the pain, right, it's not nearly as bad as the worry and anxiety make it be.
It exacerbates it to a degree, right, that it just sends it off the charts.
Exactly.
And so do you do mindfulness? Do you meditate? How did you get in that route into it?
I mean, I've always been interested in religion and spiritual experiences of everyone across.
Right.
That's what, growing up Muslim in a Christian East Texas, you don't really belong to either world, right?
Yeah.
So you're from a third.
You are.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have the Christian, everyone around you is Christian, but your parents say that you're Muslim, and so you have to sort of choose between them, or because you're being influenced from both sides, right?
Of course you are.
And so usually what happens is you accept your parents' religion, and everyone around you is that same religion, and you go your whole life. But when you're put in that situation, you have to choose, right? Like which parts of which thing are good and which parts of which thing are bad.
Right.
And you have to sort of objectively
work for you or don't work for you.
Exactly.
Rather than putting good, bad,
right?
Right?
Exactly.
I mean, work
right.
or not.
Right.
Okay, so how did you do that?
So
talk about that, because
okay,
I'm very interested in how, like, for example, when I've studied Christianity, that there was a reformation, that it went through, and we have Martin Luther and went out there, and then now you have this Christianity that is by no means monolithic. I mean, my God, it's from the most fundamental all the way up to the mystical.
Right.
In the same way, in Islam, there's the Sufis and the Rumi and Hafiz and all the. So all the way, and then you have Sunni and Shia and all, as I understand it. Help me if I'm not. So do you see an evolution happening in Islam?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, like you said, Christianity has been around longer than Islam. I think about 600 years between Jesus and Muhammad, and so Islam is younger. A lot of changes are happening in Islam right now, I think, especially with regard to how you interpret the scripture, right?
Yes.
In Christianity, the sort of because there's these bad things that we agree today are just morally bad, such as the things about homosexuality and women, and there's several avenues in Christianity. You can say Jesus died, and so he died so that we don't have to personally persecute those people now because he died for their sins and etc.
Which I never totally, honest to God, understood. I never cognitively. I'm not saying that if there's anything that isn't a matter of fact, but I never got the law. I never got it from a logical standpoint, and I hope that someone will explain it to me. But anyway, continue.
But it's for religious people, they want
exactly,
something within
and
religion.
I honor that. I honor that. Yeah.
It's better than So, but in Islam today, there's a movement where it says that in a lot of the Quran, right, if you read it, and you study the Bedouin society, which is the pre-Islamic society, they were tribal, they were violent, they were an honor-driven society. So if you
and male-driven,
exactly,
they were male-centric because we were talking about very right.
So take the male-centric aspect of Bedouin society. When the Quran comes, it when we read it today, it seems sort of misogynistic and sexist, but if you compare it to the Bedouin society, it made a lot of improvements, such as it gave women the right to divorce, it gave women the right to request the money that you get when you marry someone. So
sure.
the male has to give, right, the dowry, exactly. And it allowed the women to take half the dowry, so they could say, I'm going to marry you, and I'm not going to accept your dowry now, but if you divorce me, you have to give me all of the dowry, and you can set it to whatever you want, right? And so that gave women a whole lot of more rights than they had.
So it was relative
Exactly.
power rather than absolute.
Exactly. And so the argument now that's coming in Islam that's trying to reform is saying we shouldn't take that, because the Quran was written for the Bedouin societies, it wasn't written for humanity, we should take the concept of incremental improvement that the Quran does, and that the Quran embodies, and apply it to modern society. And so just like women today might have incremental differences between male and female, we should apply the same concept of improving those in the present society, and that's how they interpret those aspects of the Quran. And I mean that it's not 100% catched on, but it's a movement that's going on within it. And
that's what I'm asking for, is because we're not hearing that. We have the drum beat. There is the drum beat. So when you hear, when you see in the press, when you see in the news, the misinterpretations, on both sides of the Quran and of Islam, how do you both deal with it and have that in your own learning and growth?
Well, I think there's a difference between attacking Islam as an idea and the people of Islam and Muslims. So when people say that they don't like the violent aspects of Islam, I don't interpret it as they think I'm violent and that I'm terrible. I mean, some people who say those things do mean those things, but a lot of times people don't like the idea that it represents, and for good reason, because if you interpret them literally, some of them, they are pretty bad, right?
Exactly.
And so it takes, I think, but you have to emphasize that difference, right? Because I think a lot of people, when they hear these criticisms of Islam, which might be valid, they think therefore all Muslims are violent or aggressive and that they need to be stopped. And so emphasizing the difference between attacking Muslims.
Donna's saying we have 3 more minutes, so now we get to solve the world in 3 minutes. All right, but continue on.
And so that's it,
So you're opening yourself then to both learning and growing, and to seeing how, and when you look out at the campus at the University of Texas, are you finding a lot of interest? Are people curious? Are they hopeful? Are there what's going on there?
There's a lot of, I think, there's a lot of hopelessness that people feel that there's certain problems that we can't solve, and that it's going to be just a matter of overpowering people to get our way. And I think when you understand how people work, certain things such as evil and hatred come from a place of ignorance and not from hatred or some insurpassable difference between people that can't be reconciled. And so I have a lot of hope for the future, and I try and share that with my peers, and I think just in conversations exactly like this, you reach that sort of hopefulness, because even if someone's as different as you can possibly imagine from you, you can still connect with them on a human basis and find those common similarities. And I think that
that's where I think that the common ground, because we both want. What I find when I talk with my my friends and the people that are my acquaintances that I have, and when I really get down to it, we want the same things.
Exactly.
How we get there may be different, but
we're on the same team. We all want the same thing.
And we're all part of we're all part of this process, and I need to remind myself and then re-remind by my actions. And I think this is our opportunity, because we've gone from a hierarchical to a nodal consciousness with the internet, with the opportunity for your cousin in Cairo to see this conversation tonight, were I to put it up and then put it up on the YouTube tonight. Now, how long would that have taken 20 years ago,
Right.
30 years ago, before they could have been, we had to ship a videotape and get it
Right.
over there and to make sure, go through custom, da-da-da.
Yeah. It's incredible potential. And I think if we use it correctly, it has the chance to change the world. In the best way.
And the thing is that if we look at in the hierarchies, as we're talking about, fear is a baser emotion, and it takes more lift for me to get from this the amygdala up to the anterior signaling.
Yeah,
It takes
absolutely.
lift in the same way that in physics, you know, it takes lift
More
to lift
power.
up, right?
Exactly. It takes practice. It's just like you train your muscles, you have to train your mind in the gym of interpersonal relationships, and I think that's important that we should emphasize. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a blink of an eye. Thank you.
I will go change my clothes and I'll be.
Hi, I'm Ryan. How are you?
Hello, Ryan.
Nice
How
to
are
meet
you?
you. I'm great. How are you doing?
Coughlin.
Coglin.
Coughlin.
Coglin. That's it.
If you'll mic her up, I'll change.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So if you want to stick this up the front of your shirt.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Does it matter how far away?
One more rung up.
Okay. Clip.
There we go. So we get there. Okay.
Okay.
We're right back in.
Cool. Hi.
How you're going to be looking at him?
Yeah. Does that work? Hi, I'm Ryan.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
What do you do?
I'm a doctor.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm.
What do you do?
I'm just a lowly college student.
Yeah. Are you from Cairo?
My dad is from.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
that's
You grew up here in Texas?
Mhm.
Okay. I heard like the last little blurb
yeah.
of what you were saying. Yeah.
That's so cool. Where
Yeah.
did you study?
I went to medical school at University of Missouri.
Very cool.
Yeah, and then did my residency in San Antonio, and now I'm working here. So,
In Austin?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
well, Round Rock technically.
Oh yeah.
I guess
Do you
so.
have
Yeah.
a specialty? Or?
I do. It's called physical medicine and rehabilitation.
Wow.
So it's working with patients after strokes or spinal cord injuries or knee injuries, or you know,
Right.
to get them back doing the
Yeah.
stuff they want to do.
My grandma had my grandpa had a stroke, and he had to do that. And there's a lot of, I think, metaphors for persistence and practicing and over
Absolutely.
again that are within that.
Yeah.
Inspiring.
Yeah.
Well, that's very
How's
cool.
he doing?
Huh?
How's your grandpa doing?
He passed away,
Okay.
but not from that. It
Okay.
was different. He smoked all the time, so it was lung cancer inevitable. So.
Gotcha.
But the
Yeah.
heart attack people did a great job preparing him.
That's good. So, and what year are you?
A junior.
Okay, and you're studying. Donna told
Government
me.
And
Oh,
European thought.
okay.
Yeah.
Coughlin. Got it. All right. Well, what we're going to do is they're going to tell us when we started, and then we'll just continue. We're going to have a conversation.
Awesome.
Just a basic one human being to another human being, talking about consciousness and spirituality and the things that we began to talk about.
I love it. Let's do it. It's going to be a break.
Out of Africa.
Yes.
Africa. Do you have any memories about Africa?
In terms of what?
Just
Like
Con-
me?
yeah.
Well, so I was there after college.
right.
So I have lots of memories.
Oh, well, you have lots of memories.
Yeah.
Why Africa?
I think so. When I was in
And
Africa,
what part?
Kenya, mostly East Africa. I was
Mhm.
in Egypt for a little bit, and then Kenya, and then
Mhm.
I had plans to go elsewhere, but I didn't. I wasn't able to. So
Yeah.
I stayed in Kenya for the most part. My memory.
Why there? Why there? And who were you? What year were you there? How old were you then?
I was there in 2002, so
Mhm.
I would have been roughly 21, 22.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Check the tape here. We have,
Do you want me to, did I move?
I don't know, things are not lining up exactly. Yeah. Is that good?
Good.
Good. All right.
It wasn't until I was leaving Africa.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my parents had their honeymoon in Africa, in Kenya actually.
Yeah.
And then I guess, and I'm not sure really intentionally or unintentionally, but somehow I really basically grew up on African child books.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a do you have a sense of the primal rhythms or
Yes.
anything that is happening
Absolutely.
from Africa? Talk about that.
Well, let me talk about it in the context of New Orleans.
Yes.
So
Ooh, all right.
Uh-huh. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri,
Yep.
went to college, went on this trip, and part of which I was in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and then came home and that was at the time that I was sort of thinking about medical school, public health.
Good. Keep going.
And it was at that point that I was looking for a degree in Masters of Public Health
Yes.
and was looking at all the different schools, including Tulane University in New Orleans. New Orleans spoke to me when I was there for my interview, basically. And it was the rhythm. It's the rhythm of New Orleans that really, when you look at it,
Now this is pre-Katrina, right?
this was just pre-Katrina.
Oh.
I was there for Katrina. Yeah. Well, I wasn't technically in New Orleans, but I was.
But during the time.
I was living in
this
New
is
Orleans.
This is Dr. Ryan Coughlin.
Hi.
And anyway, welcome to the reasonably spontaneous conversation that we're having about life and consciousness and growth. And right now we have you in New Orleans, and you haven't gone to medical school. You're
Not
not
yet.
thinking about this,
Not
but
considering.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're considering.
avoiding.
You're considering avoiding. There
we
you go.
go.
It's
Yeah.
destiny, right? I mean, you
A little
have
bit.
your personal mission, your personal legend, and you're
Mhm.
doing everything you can to run away from it.
Pretty much, yeah. So it was just the rhythm of it, and it's Haitian, it's Creole,
Mm.
but really, I think to me, it resonated with the same bones in my body that resonated in Africa, and it felt like home.
That is wonderful.
Yeah.
And did you have at that time, because you're a brain scientist, and have you always had an interest in consciousness, just in the emergence of how does consciousness emerge, evolve, and grow within our what we call our bodies?
From the science perspective, yes. So spiritually on one end, yes.
Yes.
And then my degree in undergrad was called the biologic basis of behavior.
Yes.
So that's very, very similar to how does our brain create signals, or what parts of our brain are responsible for the innateness
Right.
within ourselves, which I still don't know that anybody's really figured out.
It hasn't.
Yeah.
There's more that we don't know than we know.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, and so you you went ahead and went to medical school and you began to study the brain and to study neuroscience.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what was it? What was this impelling in? What did? How have you gotten the direction? Because where we met, our producer, Donna Cosper, I got a chance to go out to your beautiful rehabilitation hospital
Yes.
that is there, and to see he's going through rehabilitation, and so can you talk about what you're seeing, experiencing, doing when you're there?
Really, I see myself as a coach. Patients come to my facility after they've been sick in the hospital or have experienced a decline in their function at home.
Right.
And they come to us, and my goal is to get them their goal. So in that, I oversee the therapists, and we also have medical staff, other physicians who look at the medical part of the patient. What's their blood pressure doing? What's their blood sugars doing? And I see my goal my goal is really to look at the big picture.
Yes.
And to help the patients, show them the way to do whatever it is they want to do. Walk again, talk again. Some it's to be able to go, play with their grandkids. For others, it's they want to get back on the field and coach, Little League or whatever it may be. Speak again, swallow again, any of those things. And really help them figure out how to do that.
Exactly. And what I love about that as a concept is because you're not using it in absolute. You're using it as a relative.
Right.
So that because what I found in life is that if I look at myself on a movement rather than as if it's a light switch, it's either good or bad. It's
Right.
not. But I'm making incremental adjustment and moving to wherever I am. So it's relativity rather than absolutism.
Exactly. And really, for every patient, it's different.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not keeping them alive longer, which is there's always a role for. It's not me telling them what they need to do. It's them coming in and telling us what they want to do and helping them to do that.
How do you get there with people? Because here you have families who have their own ideas of where they would like to be, and then you have the person who remembers themselves and having themselves. How do you get there? And
I think it's different for every patient, as we've
again,
said.
because one of the things about physicians and nurses and physical therapists is the degree of listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
How have you worked on your listening to make that an important part of your practice?
How have I worked on it? Practice. Practice, really. I think you have to learn, and you have to sense when that patient that you're working with, that other human being that you're working with, is ready to tell you.
Yes.
So it's not always when I'm visiting them in the room.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's my third visit in the room to follow up on something that's happened that day. Sometimes it's when they're walking down the hall with a therapist, or when they're using their feet to pedal down the hall to get to their therapy session in the gym. And it's in a lot of ways it's a base feeling that you can ask them or look at them or they look at you, and that's where there's going to be a moment to connect.
Can you talk about, I want to talk about spirituality with you in this realm. Okay. What is this mind-body connection? This because we're much more than just a collection of neurons and a connection of reconnection. How do you bring that both in there, in both from your own story and in your practice?
So I grew up mind over matter. I remember my mom saying
Christian Scientist. My family was Christian Science. So
is that similar? I don't know.
Very much
I don't know
so.
much about it. Okay.
It's the mystical end of Christianity, where change your thinking, change your life. It was
very much
exactly.
Yeah. So there's a component of it that I don't understand and I can't understand. And if anything, I think medicine is divergent from that, because in medicine it's very much, especially these days, evidence-based and research-based and cold hard fact for lots of reasons. But you can't deny the fact that there is that component of the brain and the soul, or the spirituality, being able to also have an impact. So, you know, I've found since I've been working on the inpatient side of things, I have more of an opportunity to explore that, because in a 10-minute or even in a 30-minute single appointment with a patient in an outpatient setting, you don't have time for those
No.
conversations. And you don't have time to let that develop or grow. But there's certainly, you know, you see patients who come in and they've given up, and sometimes they leave in that same state, and sometimes for some reason they're able to pull it back together emotionally, physically, spiritually, and you know, set themselves in a different path than when they came into the hospital. But I think that's part of spirituality, isn't it? Is that you can't quite touch it.
Exactly. I don't think we can. I don't think we can get there through our intellect.
Right.
If it could,
Right.
if we could, then it would be the smart people that would get there, and
Right.
and those of us who are in the middle, we wouldn't get there, and we. Yeah, I agree with you. So it has to be bigger than just the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
We have to get there through our. What is it that Einstein says? I didn't arrive at my understanding of the universe through my rational mind. Because there is that function of intuition.
Right.
There are so many different aspects.
Of letting go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of letting go, just at that moment, and then the insight comes. Do you use your intuition in your diagnoses, or you're getting an opportunity to choose a modality to let the patient figure something out?
I think more in, for me, it's more if something's not right, if something's not clicking. That little
Yeah.
niggling, okay, I'm missing something here. What is it? I'm going to go dive into it.
Yeah.
In terms of rehab in and of itself, I mean, so much of it is patient-based. And,
Yes.
and when I say that, I don't mean that in terms of a catchword, but I mean, it's really, and I tell my patients all this every day, we can just show you the way. We can't actually do the hard work for you. You know, when they're sick in the acute hospital, the doctor orders a medicine and the patient takes the medicine. But in the rehab world, that's not the way it works. We can't make them walk. We can't force them to do their legs. We can't, it's really, they have to drive it. It's very, very self-driven in that sense. And so, you know, it's a little different. It's just, and that's what I love about it. That's what I love about rehab.
And so when so much of it is that, am I going to be able to get? I was talking with Tarek, a wonderful guest that we had, a 20-year-old, and we were talking about how both of us are wired optimistic. You know, like on a 0 to 1 scale, I'm like, I wake up in the morning and I'm like at a 0.82. I just wake up. That's my set point. My wife is not a morning person. And the thing that I hear over 20 years that we have, more years that we have, is, well, honey, what's the matter? Nothing's the matter. I'm not a morning person. I have to tell you this. So it's just a difference of where we're wired. Are you able to move people from their natural wiring, or to get over the sense of that they've had a real shock to the system, and getting back and getting the encouragement to know that we can go forward?
I think it's the opposite. So I think it's you come to where the patient is. And then when you go there,
so much more sense.
Then you can work with them where they are. And again, they either shift or they don't shift. But just because they're not an optimist, or just because they're having a hard time, doesn't mean they can't progress, and doesn't mean they can't reach their own goals.
Right.
And you said something else I was going to comment on, and I can't remember it now. But you know, it's the being wired, I think, is very it's scientific, I guess.
Exactly. Well,
right?
you know, but there are things that I can't take credit for. Like, I can't take credit for that I was born born male. And I know that there is a big difference between the experience in the United States during the time that I was growing up, and even now, that a woman has and a man. It's just differences in our experience. There's differences. You know, I grew up in a very educated household where there was never a question of whether or not there was food on the table, and that all those things I take no credit for. That was just part of the way. Yeah, that was just the luck of the draw, or whatever it is. And so those are the things I cannot take credit for. But
Right.
but the tenacity and being able to get back up, and when all of us get knocked down, and
Right.
that's what I'm trying to learn and trying to continue to have as a part of me. I know I'm not asking a question there,
Yeah,
but just
because
jump
you
in
know,
there
I
anywhere.
think that's I think
Help me.
that's so. That was the other thing I was going to say. I'm glad you said that. Part of the beauty of what we do in the rehab world is the patients see each other.
Yep.
And so they get a lot of tenacity and they get a lot of drive from each other, whether it's looking at somebody who's far worse off than they are and saying, well, hell, if they can do this, so can I.
Yep.
Or maybe it's finding it within themselves to be compassionate towards somebody else, or to find the happiness with a different patient who's excelling, or, you know, there's a group component there that brings it beyond just the singular.
Oh, and I'm so glad that you said that, because to me, what happened with the 12-step movement and the concept of support group,
Yeah.
that we're not in this alone, that we
Right.
all are
Right.
on a journey, even though each of us may have approached it a different. That is just extraordinary as far as this. I think it's changed the world.
Right.
Do you find that same thing? I mean, that's where that group dynamic.
Absolutely. And I you know, I don't know if it's changed the world. It seems maybe we're getting back to what we were originally.
Oh,
You
I
know, going
love that.
back to Africa, where it
Thank
was
you.
we are a community that works together, and there's not just one mom. The whole village helps to mother and parent a child, and you know, participate in every individual's situation. It goes back all the way to villages. You know,
I love that, Ryan, because when I think about that, is that there is more that we are alike than we are separate. And if I can think of each person there as my cousin, I mean, if we look at it evolutionarily, we are all cousins.
Right. Yeah.
We all come from a very small little gene pool that we can trace back to, that we are all, and so if that's true, then maybe I can think of it in another way.
Right.
Other than just to have. So now, where are you going? What kind of research or interest or work are you doing in your life right now?
Right now, I'm working on being a mom.
What was that experience like?
It's difficult. It's really difficult because, you know, I have worked very hard to get through medical school and residency, and
Yes.
to be singularly focused in that, and then find a wonderful man and marry him and have a child and try to figure out how to balance that is hard. I've struggled with that a lot. But it's so, you know, I think for now, the research and the other things, all these questions, and I'm a question asker. I've always been a question asker.
Yes.
You can ask my middle school teachers. One of them told me I couldn't ask any more questions one day. You know, that's on hold while I ask questions of myself to figure out how I can be better and the best mom, doctor, wife, person, focusing on me, which is different. It's very different for me.
Got to be. And how old
Yeah.
is your child?
She's 2.
He's 2.
It's a girl.
She's 2.
Uh-huh.
So what have you seen between? Did you grow this being inside
Yes.
of you?
Yep.
What was that
Biological.
like?
I didn't have time to even really consider it because I was in residency. So it just, you know, it's hard as a physician to not be the physician to yourself and to just try to experience it as a layperson.
Sure.
So some of that wonder is gone because I'm thinking, what if this goes wrong? What if this happens? Oh, now she's, you know, you don't think about it like the fruit or the, you know,
Yeah.
there are all these apps that say, well, now your child is the size of a peanut, and now they're broccoli, and now they're zucchini. And for me, it's more, well, this is all the developmental stuff that's happening. And so
Yep.
what I want to do is get away from that and get back to just being able to experience as a human, not through the medical lens. And that goes back to the same thing I was saying before in terms of when you look at the spirituality of things, medicine grinds that out of you intentionally.
Sure.
So that you can be the scientist.
Of course.
But I think that there's a lot to the art of medicine, and you know, I want to be a whole person, not just one sided.
Art. that's amazing, because the art of medicines. All right, so we're talking about both the science, which would be the IQ,
Right.
and then the art, which you're getting a chance to bring into that and balance. Are you seeing doctors, fellow nurses that you're seeing? Are you seeing more people thinking in that way?
I think, yes, absolutely. And I think that there's a big movement to do that, but it's sort of an individualized movement. And, they have things like the Art of Healing, which was a really incredible program I participated in medical school, talking about the humanity in medicine. And more there are efforts to do that. And I think it's in part because of all the burnout we see in medicine, all the suicides we see in medicine, all of those parts of I think society, U.S. society, has pushed physicians and nurses and the healthcare system so far on one side. We've lost the art, we've lost the humanity, we've lost the holding hands, that whether it's the time or the energy or the desire to connect, because really that's what we're doing with patients, is connecting with them to show them a different way.
One of the things that I love about what you said, which is such a broad subject, is to be able to bring this holistic opportunity. I mean, my niece was when she was in medical school. She was told in medical school, and she went on to work at the Mayo Clinic, and she's a colorectal surgeon. But she was told in medical school, you have 7 minutes from the time you see that patient to the time they're out the door in order to fulfill what you're in charge. So she went into surgery because she didn't feel that, there's no way to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so what I'm asking you to talk about is that how do we rethink this? Do we rethink this legislatively? Do we rethink it? What are some ways that we can begin to look at this differently than the way we're looking at it now here in the United States?
It's very interesting because this afternoon I saw one of your podcasts from a couple years ago with Dr. Iqbal, I believe. Yes. And she's doing the
concierge medicine.
Yes. And I think that's one of the ways. And I considered that when I was in residency. I thought I wanted to work, I knew I wanted to work overseas, hopefully to go back to Africa. I didn't think I could survive 3 years of internal medicine or family practice residency because I felt like the system was going to beat me down.
Right.
And so then I thought, well, maybe I'll do concierge medicine and make the money that I need to survive and then go spend the other part of my time, in a free clinic locally or overseas in developing countries or whatever that may be. And I think that that's one way to do it, but not everybody can afford that. So what do we do for everybody else? And I don't have the answer for that. My personal answer was to get into rehab medicine. On an inpatient setting, if I need to spend 2 hours with a patient, then I can spend 2 hours with that patient. And if another day it's a 5-minute or a 3-minute visit, then you can titrate your visit time based on what the patient's need is, or what the family's need is, or phone calls in the evening, or whatever that is. And for me, that's the beauty of it. And my patient load isn't so high that I couldn't do that. I think inpatient in an acute hospital, those doctors are working too hard, too fast to be able to do that. So I don't have an answer.
All right. Well, Donna's telling us we have a couple of minutes left, and what else what haven't I asked about that might be on your head or in your heart?
I'm not sure. I think that what's important about medicine and what I'm learning about myself is that there's a balance, and it's a balance between individualism and community, and me as myself and me as a mom and a wife, and patients dealing with their own issues, and then them helping each other and learning from each other. And so I think that really what we're missing today in general is balance.
I love that as a concept. That really resonates with me, because I think about whenever I am when I was a child, I would go to the down a railroad. You know where you go down a railroad tie, and you would
Yep.
see that because we lived they were out in
Yeah.
the country, and I could, and when I was walking down the center of that railroad tie, I mean not the railroad tie, but the railroad track, and on one of them, and I would sit there and I'd be right in the center of that perfect, and then suddenly I'd be off to this side, and it would take enormous energy just to be able to do. But when I was in the center, it was effortless. I could tell that that's a balance, and so I know that there's something very important in balance in order for me to be able to learn and grow. So I'm so glad that you're seeing that. And what did you name your daughter?
Quinn.
Quinn. What is it like to look at her and watch her learn?
Terrifying. Because it's another spiritual moment of how did this come to be? How did she, this beautiful, magical, happy, smart person, come from two of us who love each other?
Yeah.
And how is she going to be her own person? And just to find that herself, I guess, really.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was fun. I learned a lot, actually. It's really interesting to re-parse and
Isn't it?
reevaluate. Yeah.
All right. Well, you go. I'll.
No. Hi. How are you? Thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Half of,
That's fun.
Hold on.
can I tell you about, she just won a Supreme Court case.
Oh, fantastic. I think I saw you outside in the parking lot.
Oh, yeah.
Your car?
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's
And she's
fantastic.
half of hardened and tempered, which
band.
you're gonna get to hear. Did I say it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just said a band.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Oh.
they're awesome.
Thanks.
So will you go ahead and have a seat
have fun.
exactly where?
It's cool. This is cool. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna.
Okay, so if you would thread this up through our shirt for me, like the middle up here, yes.
Okay.
Frames there. And, yep, there we go.
Okay. Do you want it? Okay.
Let me,
Yeah.
just right there. Well, up a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Great.
All right, and he'll be right back in just a
Okay.
second.
Oh, what do you mean by that? Like, did I watch it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What did you watch?
What was the big night? Friday night back then?
Yeah, it all depends on when was back then.
Back then would have been the 80s.
Yeah.
Early 90s. I think The Facts of Life was one of my childhood favorites, and The Golden Girls. You know, if it was Friday night, I remember watching TV with my family.
Yeah.
So all of those shows, when you couldn't record, you had to be present to see it. And
Exactly, because that was what. Yeah, I remember. And where were you at the time?
Springfield, Illinois is where I'm mostly from.
Springfield. Okay, so that is that where Lincoln? Yeah, it was where Lincoln was from, right?
Capital of Illinois, mostly South Central.
And what year were you a senior in high school?
I graduated in 1996.
In '96. All right, so we're in the middle of the dot-coms just starting. Did you have an interest in that at all? Were you?
I remember when my family got dial-up internet. And by that time, my family was living in Nebraska. And so I remember doing a class project it was a group project, and I think we researched how the internet worked or something like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I started college that I got my first email address and, you know, fell in love with email. And but I don't have a memory of doing internet research. You know, I was still a child of the stacks in the library, actually, and I miss that. I've talked with my dad about that. You search
Child of the
stacks.
stacks.
Yeah,
Is that
like
not
creepy?
Oh, I love that. I love that.
But you always, or at least I always, found so much more interesting treasures around whatever book I was looking for.
I'm so glad that you bring that up, because we talk about how things are curated and brought to us with the algorithms on the internet, and suddenly, so when we talk about the curation of the algorithms, and they're brought to us, and then suddenly everything that there are no surprises because everything is an iteration of what I already have before. But in a library, like you were a kid of the stacks, and I got a chance to go into the library, what I accidentally find, serendipitously find, is something I never would have found, or any algorithm could have seen.
Or it was the brilliance of the librarians who organized it that way. I don't know, but maybe
Yeah,
that's
I'm just
its own
yes, exactly.
But it was such a wonderful, you know, it's a quiet, hidden space, and it was a search for what I was looking for, and then this fantastic search of everything around it. And I always came out with more books than I intended to grab.
Yeah.
And there's that, I mean, there's all sorts of wormholes that I could jump down if I'm doing an internet search, but it is, as you say, curated in a very specific way.
Exactly, and that's what we're doing. All right, now, this is Kristen. I'm Dennis Davidson.
Correct.
Whew. Got it. I'm so glad I got that. That's inside. Dennis is doing a little dance, and he's having a little. So anyway, musician, activist. So much of what you're doing. So let's start with music.
Okay.
Let's start with that. What was on your playlist when you were in your teenagehood? What was the formative music that moved you? How did you get into this, and did you pick up a guitar early?
I did pick up a guitar early. I think I started piano very early, but I think by second grade I was really asking to play the guitar. So that has been an instrument I've loved, and it has since developed into a passion for the pedal steel, and I started playing that a handful of years ago.
And what is a pedal steel?
A pedal steel, you hear it in any good country song, and it's actually making its way into greater genres, but it's the more complicated cousin of the lap steel. So you've got single and double necks, but it's a table neck, and then it's called pedal steel because you're actually working foot pedals and knee levers. And it's
at the same time you're playing?
At the same time, every limb is moving at the same time, and it's hard, but it's nothing creates the sound that a pedal steel can, and it can, for me, it can make a song. Just the most delicate swell of a slide can make a song. It can also break a song, but that's nuance.
Well, I have so much I want to talk with you about. But one thing, when I was reading your story, I found it fascinating that you were talking about how you were climbing the ladder of success, and you looked at the vistas and you went, this isn't what this isn't what the world says this is what I should be doing or what I need to be doing, or I'm going to have to go my own way. And so then you went out to the Rio Grande, or you went out to the Texas-Mexico border in an Airstream trailer?
Correct.
For 3 years?
About 2.
2 years. Hey, let's not mess up a good story with the facts, all right? There's a difference between the facts and the truth, right? And the truth is that you went out there for what was going on?
I'm coming up on that anniversary. Actually, it's been 6 years since I take what I call as a leap of faith. I'm a lawyer by education and career. I was in private civil practice. I'd become a partner of a established firm in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and made partner relatively quickly in the grand scheme of things. And I was very busy, and but I was really unhappy.
Yeah.
And
what was the unhappiness out of? What was it that you had explored that you hadn't gotten?
I think that there's a disconnect between theory and practice sometimes. And I think what attracted me to law school really arose out of the interest in my major that I had in college, which was religion, and enjoying beautiful language that can be operative. And I sort of felt like I didn't necessarily want to go on for a higher degree in religion, and law was fascinating because I thought there would be a lot of parallels, and in theory there are. But the practice of it is a lot more nuts and bolts, and I didn't have a lot of time in private practice to sit and think, and it was certainly hard. I had to solve really hard problems very quickly, but I think just how to practice law was frustrating to me, and then the other major component was that I had always intended to be doing something of public interest. So it was a collision of all those things, and I think I just sort of felt in a very nice office that looked over the plaza. You know, I was early 30s, and I thought, this can't be it.
Is that all there is?
I keep doing this. So I took a leap of faith, and I became a staff attorney, actually, with the Federal Public Defender's Office in the Del Rio office, which is on the border. And that was just a major change. I mean, it was a totally different, it was going from civil to criminal. It was, a different location. It was just a world change. But I can count every way my life has experienced something because I took that leap of faith, and really for the better. It's really been a wild ride.
I can imagine, and all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Talk a little about the journey. I mean, I have
Sure.
so much that I would love to share with you about, because I want to talk about music and I want to talk about your journey but let's stay in the law for a minute.
Sure.
And so how do you get to the Supreme Court?
I was in Del Rio for 2 years, and a position opened in the Austin office, and I applied and was hired for that. And a little bit on the heels of that, I joined our appellate section, which is actually based in San Antonio, but I was able to, I sort of am a satellite appellate attorney in our Austin office. And how I got to the Supreme Court, you know, I can give you the technical answer, but I think it's something that I really struggle with because it's such a rare occurrence.
Yes.
And really, I just felt like I was doing the best for the client who was in front of me.
Yes.
And it just so happens that at every stage, I just, you know, tackled the problem as I would and hopefully do for every client. And the ball just kept rolling.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just about a year last year that the petition for writ of certiorari was granted.
Which means?
It's not a right to have a case heard by the Supreme Court. They have to choose to hear the issue.
Right.
And so you petition the court to review it. And they looked at this particular case and said, yes, this is the type of problem that we want to address. And then it's off to the races. And so between September 29th of last year, I argued February 21st of this year, and the opinion came out June 18th.
Can you summarize the outcome or what was going on, or
I
what
won.
do we need to learn?
Yeah.
All right, great summary. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you very
No,
much.
The issue has to do with federal sentencing. All criminal defendants are sentenced. Their sentencing process begins with the federal sentencing guidelines.
Yes.
And there was an error in my client's calculation, but it wasn't raised before the district court.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, that type of objection can be raised on appeal, but the burden stays with the defendant to prove this four-part test.
Right.
And
like Lily Ledbetter had to prove that she knew that she wasn't being paid the same, that kind of a situation.
Kind of a burden.
It's on the burden.
The burden is on the defendant
Got
to receive relief, and we had to establish that the error was that there was an error, that it was obvious, that it affected my client's substantial rights. There was a case in 2016 by the Supreme Court that decided that in the ordinary case, when you have this miscalculation of the guideline range, that it does ordinarily affect a person's substantial rights because there's a significant risk when the guideline range is higher that they receive more prison time than they otherwise would have.
Exactly.
So then
And they don't. And you're not dealing with people who have $100,000 war chests to pay for attorneys, and this you're dealing with people who are on the line and having to do in the public defenders, correct?
all of our clients cannot afford counsel, and we are appointed to represent
And
them.
so so what did you learn about yourself during this
a lot.
process?
A lot. I'm not usually in a position where I have to sit down and challenge myself, am I capable of doing that? But that was really a threshold issue. I haven't gone to the Supreme Court before. I had to ask myself, okay, I know I don't have the immediate experience in handling a case, but am I capable of doing it? Am I capable of putting in the work? And I don't think we ask ourselves that enough. But it was a really great threshold exercise. It was not an easy thing to do, but I really dug deep and thought to myself, this is scary. I'm going to have to work incredibly hard, but yes, I'm capable of doing this. And that was a great learning experience. And then, I think stress management is always a great education.
Isn't it just?
It is. And, looking back now, I've lost objectivity because I've gone through it. But it really was just a tremendous learning experience in terms of what it takes to stand up at that podium and feel prepared and feel confident in the delivery, not only of the opening, but to field the questions from the justices. But I actually want to go back to your last question, which is about the case, because what the case that I handled decides is that the last prong, the last test, which is discretionary for a court of appeals, the case established that in the ordinary case, excess imprisonment by mistake is serious enough to normally warrant relief.
Yeah.
So that was that's what my case established, the fourth prong of that plain error test.
How wonderful. What a wonderful, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing the hard work. Thank you for looking inside yourself and saying, I'm going to take a shot at this.
Thanks.
Because there isn't a guarantee.
No, there's not. And, fortunately, by being, I'm part of a very large network of defenders, and really had some wonderful people whose knowledge and experience I was able to utilize and rely on, and really had some fantastic mentoring through the process too, which was another big learning experience.
Are you bringing that into your music? Are you bringing that into because you're part of a musical duo, right?
Hardened and tempered.
Right. Hardened and tempered. When I first saw that, when I first saw the name, I was. What I loved about it was it's like the name of Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation. It has, it's hard to, there's just so much to go into there. But give me the history of the name and what you and Carolyn are doing in this.
Well, it's a tip of the hat to steel. Not only pedal steel, but I grew up welding, so I like working with metal. And we love it as a metaphor, hard enough to hold an edge, soft enough not to break. And I think that's how we could sum up our lives. We push it, but it's pulling back sometimes that gives us the strength to keep, doing what we do. My legal world requires a very, it's a very focused way of thinking.
Yes.
So music for me is how the whole rest of me gets to catch my breath. So I'm obviously affected by the work I do, and I sort of look at music and the law as a way to cross-train my brain. But for professional reasons, and I think just personal reasons, I sort of keep those separate. So I don't necessarily bring in work experiences because music is my time to play and my time to explore all of those other nooks and crannies in my brain that need some air.
So what are you writing about? What are you? Hopefully, we're going to put some links so people can be able to know. And but what are the things that you're writing about now, and what the evolution that you're doing?
Well, we put out our first album last year called The Trailer Sessions, and it was...
That's like having a baby.
It is.
Right? I mean, you gestate it, you have to put it together, you have to let it come. I mean, like, I know, right? I love saying things like that because I know that the people go, oh, you don't know. I mean, anyway.
Well, it is you pour yourself into this creation and you launch it into the world, and it takes on a life of its own. And you have no idea what's going to happen. And it's been a great experience. But it was really born out of that leap of faith 6 years ago of living in the trailer on the border. And some of the songs come from that experience, but I think all the songs are reflective of place.
Yes.
And how place can affect our psyche, whether it's an open road for freedom or an open road that feels very claustrophobic. What I'm obsessed with these days are themes coming out of the Dust Bowl in that time period. So that's really
All right, so let's ground everyone so that we know a broad. The Dust Bowl was when we ripped the grass off of the center of the country so that it was kind of like this, and so we ended up, and so all the wind which blows across there just took away the topsoil, right?
Correct.
And that's what, and so here we ended up, what, the Oklahoma,
Texas,
Texas,
some of New Mexico, and I mean, I really think a lot of them, probably Kansas and Nebraska, although I think the epicenter is more Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle.
Absolutely.
But it's, I've been reading books from that time period, novels, and some historical recounts. And the Ken Burns documentary, I felt like I couldn't breathe.
Wasn't that something? And then the solutions that came out of that, because it really was that I've forgotten the guy's name, that who, one of Roosevelt's people that said, okay, well, we're going to go attack this and begin the kinds of farming that would begin to prevent this, and so there are solutions that can come.
Really excellent solutions, and then also the absurd too. Like one of the things that just stuck in my craw when I heard it was because the dust storms affected all the way to the East Coast. I remember the part in the documentary where asphalt companies were offering to pave over the Midwest. And I just thought, wow, we've never really understood each other, have we? Like these huge disconnects based on region of country. Yeah. And I just having being from the Midwest in both Illinois and Nebraska, I just thought, how absurd.
Well, since we only have a couple of minutes left, I just want to ask you, and so that you'll be able to answer this easily and to do this. How has religion, your own, because you studied religion, evolved that forward as to how religion and spirituality has been in evolving in your own consciousness as to what this is about, and whatever it is that a power that is out us, in us, all part of this process?
I definitely think about religion and spirituality differently. I tend to shy away from organized religion, although
Likewise.
It's an interesting study. I think spirituality, I definitely believe that science and religion can coexist, because to me spirituality is wonder.
How could it not? How could we not gaze out at the cosmos and not and as to how this all happens and not wonder?
Wonder and to in the best sense, when we feel vulnerable, like I used.
We're at the but here's what I want to do is at the end just kind of just fade off right in the middle of the conversation and to see how.
Thank you. Only 30 minutes? I know.
That are longer, to where we can have both of you and sit down and to do so. If this at all gave you a positive taste.
Oh, absolutely. This is a great experience. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Until next time.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, if you'd like to thread this up through the middle of your shirt there like this.
Shirt's tucked in.
doesn't fall across. That's probably safer.
I want to put that underneath. Yeah. That way we're- okay. Carolyn Phillips. Chris. Okay.
a lot of
I
names.
had these nightmares of mixing you two up, but that's okay.
It happens
Yeah,
all the
but
time.
Anyway, that's your.
It's all right.
I am. We have so much to talk about. Hours and hours and hours. And hours.
Yes.
I got a chance to meet Elizabeth Kubler-Ross,
Oh, wow.
and one of the in my learnings, I'm 70 years old this year, and one of my learnings is that every once in a while the universe will come up and offer you, will say, here, have you, and then whether or not I accept it or not is going to.
Oh, where did this go off to? I'm going to swap your mics because I think this is a lesser mic. I've done the wrong thing here. Okay, we can
You wanna
just
take this off?
unclip. Yes. I'm going to swap this. And there.
Okay.
Let me see if I can grab this for you. Yeah, that'll be fine. And I'm going to put this. And then here, I'll put that underneath, please. Not your first time. So anyway, I met her, went out to her ranch and sat there, and she put her arms around me. Little bitty, tiny woman.
Really?
Put her arms around me and she said, "What shall we do together?" Scared the shit out of me. I ran the other way, you know. This is, but my consciousness at 30 at that time
Right,
was
right, it was
just that
overwhelming.
I
Yeah.
couldn't accept what the universe was asking me or
Yeah.
offering me to do.
Yeah.
So now, what I'm doing now is that my role model is Grandma Moses.
Uh-huh.
And are you familiar with her?
No,
She was in the 50s. She was discovered at age 78. First time she just started, she'd gone through arthritis and had returned to painting, and suddenly she went worldwide attention
amazing.
with the painting. So Grandma Moses. So take anyway.
Right?
So
We should never stop evolving.
because of your work, okie doke.
Thank you.
Because of your work with death and dying,
Yeah.
and your work with oncology, and
Yeah.
this, I went, oh my God, there is so much I have.
Yeah.
What brought you into oncology, and that as an impelling in your career?
Yeah, so I started in nursing in my young 20s.
Yes.
And I,
What years were these?
let's see, so I graduated from nursing school in 2002.
All right, so 2002, and did you have a specialty? Oh, by the way, this is Carolyn Phillips. I'm Dennis Stardon. This is Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation. Continue.
Yeah, so I started in nursing school, and prior to nursing school, I had worked as a nursing assistant while
Yes.
I was doing my other undergraduate work. And I was always drawn to people who were at the end stage of life, actually. And I really was drawn to caring for people during that time, caring for their families during that time. And so when I started nursing school, I was drawn to specialties that had more of that complexity. And
Do you know what drew you there? Why it would? Because if there's anything that I understand, because I've had this fear of death so much of my life. I really worked on it. I've studied it, and I've learned, as we were talking about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and that this is important.
yeah.
This is an important part of the human experience, but here in the West, oh dear God, we don't talk about it.
Yeah, I think that I have not had a fear of death for most of my life, and I've had almost a kind of a continual relationship with life and death and looking at it, and I felt really comfortable there. And so when I was with people at the end of life, that was a comfortable place for me to be, and I knew I could be there with them, hold the space for them, be calm for them. And that was just early on where I was really comfortable.
I've always had a sense that, or I've had a sense that whatever it is about death, is that it's more like that someone's moved to a different area code. I just don't have the area code. Nothing's really happened. Nothing really happened. Just like if we talk about in physics, that you can go from one state to another, but you can't create or destroy. That just seems like that. Did you? Was that part of the sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The first death that I experienced felt that. I felt a shift. I felt something that was very magical that I couldn't explain. It was a live being who was there with me one moment, and then it was a very different energy and feeling in the room that next moment. So.
And so in your practice, so now you're developing this practice as an ontological nurse. Help me.
That's all right.
Anyhow,
that's all right.
So you're developing this practice, and it has its own stressors that nurses within the practice have to go through as we're going through because being with someone who is grieving or being with someone who is letting go, we take some of that on.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I'm an oncology nurse.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And you're right. In oncology care, while many people survive cancer, some don't.
Absolutely.
And it is we know the patients that we care for oftentimes for years. We see them weekly, and we develop relationships with them. And in our profession, we're really not taught that this will happen. We're taught to keep strong boundaries, so that we can remain objective. But we never talk about this human side of being with somebody during this time and that impact it has on self. And so we're not taught how to cope with that in our profession.
How is that not? Is that because we were? I don't care. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's not the place where I want to ask why.
Okay.
What I want to ask is how you're doing it now, how you're bringing this into your practice now.
So it's been a long journey, and I, after practicing as an oncology nurse for about 10 years, I started realizing it was having an effect on my whole being, my emotions, my physical self, my spiritual self, everything.
Wow.
And I couldn't understand how this had happened because this is a profession that I loved. This was work that I loved and I knew was meaningful. And so I didn't know why it was starting to hurt me. And so at that time, I started just trying to figure out how to move through it. So I started writing whatever I was thinking about or carrying with me. And what I realized is there was a whole bunch of people I was carrying with me, a lot of people that I'd cared for years and lost. And I never knew how to grieve the loss of them because I was taught to be the professional that I shouldn't have grief.
Exactly.
And
wall.
Yeah, and so it just got stuck, and it was just kind of buried in me until I started writing about it. And when I wrote about it, for me, it didn't personally move the dial on my emotional healing. I thought what it did is it brought awareness to the fact that I had never grieved the loss of these people. And so being a musician and knowing that I have sung through other emotional experiences in the past, I thought, okay, I need to hire a songwriter, someone who doesn't know me, to see if they could take my caregiving story and put it in a song that would be healing for me. And so that's what I did. And I put one of my first caregiving stories into a song, or into a story, and then she put it into a song for me. And the first time that I sang the words that she took from my story, I felt the weight of so many people I had cared for move through me. And I really, I at that point had stopped feeling emotions. I stopped crying. I didn't have normal emotional responses. And that was the first time that I was able to let go and really feel the emotions I had been bearing for a long time.
And then did you begin sharing this with other nurses who were in the profession and have talk about that journey?
Yeah, because that was the next question. Okay, this worked for me, but will this work for others? And so I was working in Santa Fe at that time, and I convinced a bunch of my colleagues to go on this journey with me. And so we piloted the program there, where they met once a week, and they started writing what they were carrying with them. And again, I didn't prescribe what to write. I just, whatever you need to move through. And the majority of them wrote about people they were carrying with them. And then I brought in a team of songwriters, did the same process, and it was a profound experience. And so I had those two profound experiences, and then I started presenting nationwide on this program at different oncology conferences, and I would have lines of people coming up saying, I need this, like, and just tears, you know. I mean, it was just this emotional release that was really profound. And so then I thought, okay, I've got to move with this. And at that same time, I was starting my PhD in nursing.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, I was met from a lot of the professionals and a lot of experienced researchers who have had long history of getting their research funded, that this topic was not fundable by the NIH.
Exactly. I mean, that is just like in computer research, emotional intelligence has not been funded, yet it is the big, you've just touched it.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, I know how much this means to people because I have now experienced it on so many different levels. So I pivoted while I was doing my PhD and decided I'm going to start a nonprofit organization. And, you know, I'm going to do this work. I'm going to find a way. And
Let's put on a show.
Yes. And so we did. We turned it into a nonprofit organization called Songs for the Soul. It's a 501c3. And in our very first inaugural fundraiser, we raised over $40,000 to start bringing more of these programs to healthcare professionals in Austin, but also throughout the country is our vision. And so then I've also continued to tackle it and kind of continued to make the argument that this is worthwhile. And I am researching this for my dissertation. And I was able to amazingly accumulate about another $50,000 worth of research grant funding to be able to research the actual outcomes of this program. So this fall I've started doing 4 different programs within Austin for oncology nurses where we're implementing the program and then looking at different outcomes to see.
And so, and the outcome can be, I mean, the prosaic example that we use is to put your mask over yourself before you try to help someone else. Because if you're not bringing, your best, your highest, your most healed, your most peaceful in a tank, right? How does that help these precious souls that you're helping to transition,
Isn't
the families that you're helping to grieve?
It's amazingly simple, yet I've had to make this argument so many times that is novel in some cases.
Yes,
It's shocking to me.
Where are you hearing it at medical schools, at practices, and this? Where are you hearing the resistance? Where are you feeling the pushback?
So if I would have answered that question maybe 2 years ago, I would have said across the board.
You bet.
Nursing schools, medical schools, definitely in the research world. But within these last couple of years, there has been a shift.
Something is happening.
It is.
Isn't it amazing when the idea meets the...
It's amazing, and it just like reaffirms that you're on the right path. You know, I felt crazy for a really long time.
Exactly as the innovators do. So where are you finding sisters and brothers who are standing up and saying, I'm going to help, I'm going to join and be part of this process?
What has helped is that there's research showing that
Thank
there
you.
is a direct link
Isn't
between
that
the
amazing?
well-being of the clinician and the care that we're able to give. It's common sense, really. To me, it seems obvious, but now we have research that shows that connection, which helps everything.
It was not that long ago when we're talking about in human history when it was wash your hands. What do you mean wash your hands? There's no sign there. You know that. What do you just that basic process of doing that makes such common sense ended up saving millions, dropping the Florence Nightingale and Claire Barton, and you know, dropping the infection rates down. That's what you're doing. This is a soul infection that you're treating.
One of my favorite quotes from one of the participants is, "The stories are from our soul, but the songs are for our soul." I thought,
And how is that impelling your performing and singing career and the career that you're doing with
Kristen.
with Kristen in Hardened and Tempered?
Yep.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, you did.
Hardened and Tempered. I know I was working so hard. You
lot of
saw the
names.
brain, right?
I
mean,
did.
you were inside. You went, is he going to get there? Is he going to get there? All right. Anyway, Hardened and Tempered.
Yeah.
Talk about that and
Yeah.
how that with this wonderful harmonic partner that you have.
Yeah, it all works together. So Kristen and I founded the Songs for the Soul organization together, and then actually we play with a third person when we play live, Jane Gilman, and she is on the board of the organization as well. And so almost any time we play out as Hardened and Tempered, Songs for the Soul comes up, because it's such a mission that we believe in so strongly. And a lot of the Kristen's been a songwriter for the program, and so the songs that we have created, we will play, you know, as an example for people to hear. And what's amazing is it allows people to interact with us then in a different way. You know, after our shows, we talk to them about their grief stories, people they have lost, their cancer experiences, but it creates a conversation that we wouldn't have otherwise had, which is amazing.
One of the neat, because we haven't gotten quite there science-wise, that to have immortality in this physical sense. We're not there, so that certainly for me and certainly for most of the people I know, death is something that's going to come to each of us. And if it's so common, since it's ubiquitous, why can't we talk about it more? Why can't we normalize it? And that's what I feel that you're doing. You're taking it out of the extraordinary, out of the, oh my God, I can't even, and bringing it out of the closet into something that we can talk about.
Yeah, I think that if we could just talk about death, we could live life better. You know?
Isn't that I coming to terms with my own mortality has enlivened me in ways that I could never have known that I was struggling against that imperative.
Yeah. You know, and death is one of the things we are guaranteed.
Yeah.
Right now, you know.
Exactly.
Right? And an acceptance of it means that we can open up and live a more beautiful life, you know. And I do think these conversations.
We have about 3 more minutes. I only am saying that because I want you to make sure if there's something that I haven't asked about on this session that we talk about, but continue on.
I think we're
so
good.
this is our opportunity to experience and to face. I know that Stephen, God, I've forgotten his last name anyway, wrote so much with Ram Dass on death and dying.
Levine.
Yes, and he talked about how he practiced his own death. A Year to Live. He wrote that book, A Year to Live, and he practiced his own death and practiced what would life be like if I wasn't here, and just getting peaceful with this experience.
I think that when you think from that perspective, you do think of how you want to live this time differently.
Yeah, and you're getting a chance, and you're getting a chance to do it. And there's a I'm going to go back a little bit to your music here as we play ourselves out here.
Yeah.
Were you attracted to harmonies early too?
Yes. Yeah, they are truly my favorite thing to sing. I love singing harmony, and pretty much any time I listen to music, I never sing the main melody. I always sing harmony.
And what is structurally a harmony? Is it a note off of? I mean, help me understand it.
Yeah, it's like a third above or below. You can go at different ranges, but it's just a complement. And to me, it's I don't know. It's obviously supportive, but it's greater together.
There's the principle of synergy. What 1 + 1 is greater than 2.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what, I
Yeah.
think that's what we're learning in this, what we're coming from a hierarchical, male, dominated world into a nodal quantum rise of the divine feminine. That's what it feels like, what is happening to me, and I want to be part of that.
Right.
I want to
It's
be
in all of
part
us.
of that, because I had the white male privileged experience, and I know we can't do it alone. I know that. I've experienced that, and I know that when we collaborate, something incredible happens in order to make the solutions.
And when we support each other, and we are all better together.
That's what I'm finding, and it is, and it's important. But I have to be willing to step into that space. I can't just sit back and go, well, go ahead and tell. I mean, I have to be part of it. I have to be part of whatever we're going. And where is your song, your singing taking you? Where can we hear your?
You could hear us on all different platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Amazon.
Well, we'll
all
put
of
that up
those.
on the. We'll put the link
Okay,
up on there,
yeah.
and we'll do that.
Thank you so much. This has been lovely.
Has it been fun?
Yeah, it
Well,
has
it's sure
been.
fun for me.
Yes. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And such thoughtful questions.
Well, the